Hello everybody, it's me GhostCritic. It's Monday, so I'm going to pose you a comic book question and then I'm going to answer lots of yours. I did get a lot of questions last week. I put the call out because we didn't have many last week and I was, well, I won't say inundated, but there is a lot to get through this week. But before we get to those, it's my question of the week to you lot out there. Now, obviously, the comic book world is a flutter, getting their knickers in a twist regarding the rumoured relaunch of all the Marvel titles in 2015. So far, it's only the Avengers. They've not said, unless, something's come out within the last, 24 hours that I've missed, it's only the Avengers that are getting kind of rebooted and relaunched, so to speak. So we've had a couple of our guys in the community give their thoughts about that. Oddfellow's thoughts and Custom Bromstar giving their views in some videos. I'll put links to their videos in the description bar below. So it got me thinking, obviously, about relaunches. And I'm not necessarily going to ask you about kind of like publishing companies' reboots, but more about character relaunches. It doesn't seem to go by in a year where someone has a comic book relaunched back to an issue 1. So what I want to know from you this week is, what has been your favourite relaunch of a comic book character? And that's your question of the week. Let's see what you've got to offer. Put your answers in the comment section down below. So on to this week's questions that you posed to me. And whoa, well, Wednesday Serial Matt, he decided to go 180-degree turn from one very short, silly question to asking me a bunch of, relatively, decent questions. So I'm going to crack on with his first. He started off by asking, who do you think is more important to the outcome of a great comic, the colorist or the letterer? I'm going to go and say the colorist. I think on the whole, the lettering of a comic doesn't really change a great deal. Sure, you have, kind of sound effects, which they kind of create these crazy kind of letterings. But for the most part, lettering is quite standard and it doesn't really bother me. I look at some writing and if I can read it, I read it and it doesn't really affect how it looks to me. But if you had a really awful colorist, it's going to spoil my visual enjoyment of a comic book. So I think the colorist is more important than the letterer. Sorry to any letterers out there. His second question was, who is your favourite editor? Now, I have to hold my hands up here and say, I can't even name one editor, never mind my favourite editor. And I think this is a degree of comic appreciation that I don't really get into. I don't care who's editing a book or a line of comic books. I'm more interested in the artist and the writer. I understand that, the editor could just totally ruin a writer or an artist's work, but I don't know any, so I haven't got any favourites. I'd be interested to know what yours is, Matt. What do you think of Seconds? Now, I presume he's talking about Brian Lee O'Malley's latest book, Seconds. I bought this a couple of weeks ago and I think it's fabulous. It's a highly recommended book for you to go out and buy. I don't really want to go into too much detail about this, but it is just really kind of enchanting. It's very engrossing. I didn't want to read this in one go, but I did. It was that good. If you're a fan of Scott Pilgrim, then you're going to enjoy this regardless. If you haven't read Scott Pilgrim, then this might be a good kind of inroad to it. It's not as kind of pop culture heavy as Scott Pilgrim was. It's about this young woman, Katie, who runs a restaurant, and it's kind of a bit supernaturally in it, and it's all about changing things that go wrong in your life, and is that always a good thing, or should you just kind of move on and learn from your mistakes? But if you had the opportunity to go back and do something again the right way, would you? Just a great book. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I'll be making sure I'm rereading this again in the very near future. What have we got next? He also asked, who are some of your favourite minority, women and different abled characters of comics? This was kind of a head scratcher, because as soon as, you know, someone asks you like this, you think, well, who are they? And maybe that kind of is the point of his question, because there are a great deal out there, and the kind of only three I could really come up with was Oracle, Death from the Sandman, and Zatanna, but pre the 52. Those are some of my kind of female characters. Obviously Oracle is differently abled, to be all politically correct. But yeah, they were my favourite guys. Oracle, I read the last volume before the 52 of Birds of Prey, which she was in, but I've seen her obviously used and scattered around the Batman universe, and always really enjoyed that character who knew so much and had control of so much within Gotham. I liked that idea. The fact that she was in a wheelchair meant nothing to me really, because you could see beyond that and realise that, you know, just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean you're not an effective and useful member of society. And that was the clever thing about anyone who wrote Oracle well, was that you forgot that she was in a wheelchair and that she was just an able-bodied person who was incredibly useful to Batman. Finally, of his questions, which British creator has had the greatest influence on comics? I think the obvious answer would be to say Alan Moore. I do wonder what the landscape of comic books would have looked like if it hadn't been for Watchmen. That obviously was the catalyst for a great deal of stories that came after it, making, you know, DC characters, not just DC, but, you know, it went over into Marvel as well, but making these characters more gritty, have more real life kind of problems to deal with. But like I say, it's an obvious choice. For me personally, I'd have to say Neil Gaiman. Not only because he wrote The Sandman, which is one of my all-time favourite series of all time, but reading The Sandman introduced me pretty much into the world of Vertigo Comics. And so that opened a whole new avenue of great comic books that I hadn't always been, you know, parlay to, and I was more the capes, the superheroes, the tights, all that, and didn't realise there was this whole kind of adult orientated kind of imprint that had all these marvellous stories. So personally Neil Gaiman, but I think it's widely recognised that it's Alan Moore. Okay, moving on. Someone else asked me a question. It was Clouded Journey. He asked me, who's an underdeveloped character you would like to see reinvigorated? I kind of had two for this. The first one, I have to say, is Doctor Strange. Now, I'm not saying he's not particularly been developed a great deal. I just think he's missing a great deal in the Marvel universe. Obviously, I don't read a lot of Marvel now, so he may be there somewhere, but he needs his own kind of title. Lately, well, going back for I don't know how long, it's always been kind of mini-series. They've usually been retelling his origin. There was Doctor Strange the Oath, which was a great kind of mini-series, but we want an ongoing title for him, reintroduce him to the Marvel universe and to a whole, plethora of new readers out there. Now, the other one I was going to pick, and I do realise that this character does already have a title out there, but it's not one I've read, so it's difficult for me to really comment on this. But I'd like to see Silver Surfer used in the way I remember him, and being a much bigger force to be reckoned with. Like I said, I'm not reading this current series, and not that Allred is a bad artist, but it's the artwork that puts me off getting that title. The quirky hipster artwork does nothing for me within that genre, the kind of superhero Marvel universe. He's great on his indie titles. He was good on Ecstatics, but only because those characters were so strange and kind of kooky and quirky that his artwork worked there. But with a character like Silver Surfer, I want to see the grandeur of that character back. So there you go. Custom Bromstar, Scott, thank you for asking me a question, mate. It's another Alan Moore, and we've got more Alan Moore to come later. But he asked me, if you had to have Alan Moore write one of the following, which would it be and why? And he gave me three options of The Unwritten, Fables and Buffy. Now, straight away I went, no, I don't want him touching Fables. That is Willingham's baby. It's been like that from the very beginning. Alan Moore cannot touch that. I honestly don't think Alan Moore would touch Buffy with the long end of a pooey stick. So I would reckon he would actually be a good choice for The Unwritten, and could do a great story that involved the idea of stories. So I'm going to choose The Unwritten. Mr. Gretzky 9966 asked me, what is your favourite Justice League story and why? And this was a bit of a head scratcher for me, because I have almost the last run of Justice League of America before the 52. I kind of, funnily enough, I'm going to cut short, a little bit too short, and I dropped Justice League of America, and there was probably only about 6 or 7 more issues to go before it rebooted, so I could have just stuck with it. But within that series, I couldn't think of one, really good JLA story. So I had to do a little bit of internet searching and see if anything kind of reminded me, oh yes, I've read that, I thought it was really good. And the only one that I could really come up with that I've personally read and actually did really enjoy was Identity Crisis, which is a JLA story really. It might not be the actual title, the ongoing series, but it was certainly based on that team and obviously the team's significant others, friends and family around them. And you know, it was this mystery story wrapped around all these superheroes, and it was just something that really appealed to me. Helped that Brad Meltzer was writing it, Greg Morales was on art. It was just, I just really enjoyed it from start to finish, and it was one of those crisis books that I'd managed to get in at kind of like, you know, the bottom level. You know, I was there from the start instead of hearing everyone going, oh, have you read this crisis book, have you read this crisis book, and I'm going, well actually no, so I couldn't join in the conversation. But with that I was able to. So for me, Identity Crisis. On we go. Derek Lucarelli asked me a question. Do you think Damian will come back in the Robin Rises storyline? If not, who would you want as the next Robin? I have absolutely no idea. To be honest, I hope Damian doesn't come back. I didn't read any of how he died, but let's keep him dead. Let's just keep him dead. Otherwise, you know, all the kind of trauma and the heart-wrenching agony that Batman went through is all for nothing and means nothing. Let's keep with that. Let it last at least, you know, give it another 5 years. Yes. Who would I want the next Robin to be? And yes, he said we couldn't, you know, obviously use Harper Row because, as we've seen, the likelihood is, well, we know it is, she's going to become Bluebird. I wanted, because I thought, wouldn't it be nice to keep it in the family and have her brother become Robin, Cullen, but when you've read him, you realise he really doesn't have any of the skills that past Robins have had. So how they could incorporate that would be, one, highly suspicious, and two, quite impractical. So I mean, I mentioned her in last week's video of Question of the Week. It'd be nice to see at least a version of Cassandra Cain come back. She could potentially take on the kind of Robin mantle, given that she can't really be Batgirl. I can't really think of anybody else. No, that's going to have to be your answer. Spidey Sense 101. If there is one thing in comic book history that you could erase, what would it be? Civil War and Ultimatum. Jess S asked, what are your top 5 Alan Moore comics? What story of Moore's do you think I should read after I'm done? And I think that was, she's reading Watchmen. I'd like to say I've read 5 different titles of Alan Moore, and I probably have, but I can't really think of them. You know, you kind of get stuck on the main 2, which is obviously Watchmen, and what I'd say to read next, and which is my favourite, is V for Vendetta. If you've not read that yet, get yourself a copy of that. I actually prefer it over Watchmen, which I have said in previous videos, so it's not going to come as a shock to a lot of you. Joshua Hayes asked, who would you ideally choose to replace the dynamic do-do duo on Batwoman to revitalise the series? Obviously me and Joshua kind of have this ongoing joke about him still getting Batwoman, even though it's probably the worst comic on your shelf right now, with Mark Andreyko writing appallingly bad storylines for Batwoman. It would be great to see J.H. Williams come back and take back the the character he so skillfully brought back into the DC universe and our New 52. But I wondered, given that they'd done such a good job over on Marvel revitalising a certain character who had really been put through the shredder, let's see what they can do in a Bat universe. And I thought the team of Mark Waid and Chris Samney. Finally, Albert Bailey asked, what's your overall view of the New 52 and are you still reading JL Dark? Well, if you watch my Friday's video, my comic book review video, you'll know that yes, I am still reading JLA Dark. What's my overall view of the New 52? It's funny because not so long ago I was counting up how many comics I get for each publishing house, and I was surprised at how many DC books I'm still picking up, and the ones that I'm still kind of trying as well when they come out. Okay, a lot of them are Bat-centric titles, but there's still a lot in there, and you know, it's only Image that just sneaks in the top place of most comics I buy from a publishing company. It's doing okay in some respects, it's doing really badly in others. The idea of, you know, starting all your issues off at #1 was a great idea, starting them at kind of like their year 1 inception, but they ruined that by having this kind of a universe being 5 years old already, not starting everyone from the beginning. So Batman and Green Lantern, you know, a lot of their history is still canon in the New 52, while, you know, other characters have, you know, been washed of all their pre-52 history. It's a bit of a mess, but it's here to stay. I don't think it is going to be going away for a long time. Even with this Future's End, all this, from all the little bits I'm hearing about this, I don't think it's going to revert back to what we had in any way. If anything, it will probably change all again. You are not ever going to get your old DC universe back. And that's it. Went on a bit this week, but we all had fun, did we not? Thank you all for your questions. They were fantastic. I had a great time answering those. If you have any more questions you want to ask me, put them in the comments section below with the answer to my question I've posed to you at the top of this video. So until next week, when I'll have another question for you, bye bye.